I was born and raised on the Upper East Side, East Harlem section of Manhattan. I lived in East River public houses until I was about 8 years old, before moving to Knickerbocker Plaza in the Yorkville section of Manhattan. I was raised by a single mom along with my three sisters. Went to public schools my whole life. Had a bunch of friends who are diverse and from all over the world. And yeah, that's how I would describe it.
I cannot wait to get to Congress and cause problems for the people in there.
What made you run for Congress? Was it like a realization, or was it something you always wanted to do?
Probably more of a realization. You know, unfortunately, our children and those who are most vulnerable in our society aren't always centered in our political agenda. As an educator, I had a unique experiences and a unique perspective in making the connection between the outcomes that we see, the trauma and the poverty that exists in our communities, and the bad policy that comes from Washington.
The district was ready for a change.
With us facing a climate crisis, you've supported the Green New Deal. If elected, what would be your first change you would do locally?
We need to get people back to work. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and over 40 million people have lost their jobs during this pandemic. You know, this is the biggest crisis since the Great Depression. And after the Great Depression, we implemented a New Deal and created the Workers' Progress Administration, which was the federal jobs guarantee. And this is the perfect time for us to implement a Green New Deal in alignment to our mission of net zero carbon emissions within the next 10 years, and targeting the hardest hit communities by COVID, which are Black and brown communities, right? So that's priority number one. Let's get people back to work, creating the infrastructure that we need to be a healthier district going forward.
Your support for Medicare for all. How would you go about funding those changes?
It's not a matter of resources, it's a matter of values, right? So when we want to fund something, we always find a way to fund it. When the stock market crashed, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, we wrote a $1.5 trillion check. Done. Save the stock market, right? So a few ways. One, you know, make sure the wealthy among us pay their fair share into the system. Right now, they're not doing that. Number two, make sure large corporations like Amazon pay federal taxes, right? So they can also contribute to the system. Number three, tax Wall Street speculation, capital gains at 2%. That will generate enough revenue to begin the federal jobs guarantee. So there are a lot of ways to pay for it. So the issue is not resources, the issue is values.
With the current movement, there's been a lot of civil unrest in a lot of areas, our justice system, immigration, housing. Describe, for those who don't know, your Reconstruction agenda and how people can take part in it.
I'm excited by the protests that are happening across the country. Obviously, I want everyone to be as safe as possible, but the people rising up and pushing back against an oppressive system, that's the spirit of this country from the inception till today. So that's exciting to see. Our Reconstruction agenda is about creating a society that's truly inclusive of everyone, truly democratic, truly post-racial, or as post-racial that we can get, and really centers our common humanity, equality, and justice for all. And a big part of that is a process of truth and reconciliation, which is why we're calling for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, similar to what happened in South Africa after apartheid, so that we can heal as a nation by reckoning with our legacy of slavery and reckoning with how racism continues to permeate throughout every American institution, not just in terms of police brutality and criminal justice reform. Of course it exists there, but racism and bias exists in healthcare, exists in wealth generation, exists in education, exists in environmental issues. And that's why we continue to see the disproportionate negative outcomes for the African American and Latinx community. So truth and reconciliation is a big part of that. Another big part of the Reconstruction agenda is reallocating resources from bloated military budget and from police departments who are now militarized, and investing in public health, investing in housing infrastructure, food security, education, mental health supports, all the things that everyone needs, but particularly people who have been neglected for quite some time need as well. And then massive investment in infrastructure and jobs, which again aligns to what we talked about with regard to a Green New Deal. we always say people should pick themselves up by their bootstraps. Well, let's give the people boots first, and then allow themselves to rebuild their own communities and economies through massive investments from our federal and local governments.